Welcome, brethren, to the Valley St. Louis Master Craftsman Study Group program. We're excited to keep digging into our ritual, our philosophy, our lectures as we push further on into the Council of Kadosh and begin our exploration today of the 22nd degree Knight of the Royal Axe, or Prince of Libanus. Brethren, we're excited to get in this. We're diving deeper and deeper into the Council of Kadosh. We're over the halfway point, so definitely getting into the meatier stuff as we approach the mystery degrees and some of the deeper philosophy. If you're participating in the Master Craftsman Philosophy Study Group, please make sure you're always reading the material before you're listening to this, as we want you to do that before you go through this. This is highlights. This is high-level stuff. There's going to be some variance in material. We are going to hop around a little bit. So it's very important that you stick with reading the material and then listening to this. So, brethren, let's get started. We're excited to go and dig into the 22nd degree. So now we dig into the 22nd degree, Knight of the Royal Axe, or Prince of Libanus. Quite an interesting degree as we take some deviation away from perhaps the quarries of stonemasonry and approach carpentry and the forest, if you will. This degree depicts for us a German knight who travels to Mount Lebanon, or Mount Libanus, if you were to Latinize that, and he's pursuing a degree, a Masonic degree or rank, which he hopes to receive through this college of artificers that meets on this hill. He's challenged very, very upfrontly in regard to the fact that he's not going to receive this just because he is of a certain rank, of a certain birthright, if you will. He has to receive that knowledge through earning it, through his work, through his efforts. And so he must set aside those vanities of other things that perhaps follow him in terms of rank and birth to join the laborers in the workshops that are there at this college. And he has to fell the timbers and learn the work of the laborer, the common carpenter, and the skilled carpenter, which over time, his efforts are paid off. They're noticed, and he is rewarded. This degree does have some inherent outside traditions. Of course, I would encourage you to look into the tradition of the College of the Artificers, as well as the Druze, a sect of Islam, which plays into some part of some of the history of this degree, at least in some of the symbolism. So, this degree, of course, begins with some very important instruction, as most of these degrees do, with what I call a little jump of a charge. And they're going to emphasize some of those key ideas. And of course, key to this degree is this idea that work is the mission of man. And it's a privilege for us to work, to earn our subsistence. We should be upright, honest. And if we are doing so, the laboring man becomes the peer of kings. Idleness is disgraceful and not labor. So, we're told, in line with those lessons, very, very bluntly at the start, that sympathy with the laboring classes, respect for labor itself, and resolution to do some good work in our day and generation. These are the lessons of the degree, and they are purely Masonic. From the first to the last, masonry is work. I find that to be a beautiful quote. It venerates the grand architect of the universe. It commemorates the building of a temple. Its principal emblems are the working tools of masons and artisans. It preserves the name of the first worker in brass and iron as a password. And when the brethren meet together, they are at labor. The master is an overseer who sets the craft at work, and masonry thus becomes the apotheosis of work. Work ennobles our spirit. It ennobles us. It tells us of the great use of our quality, our skill, our nature. It is in the hands of the brave, forgotten men that have made made a great populous and cultivated world, a world for us. It is all work and forgotten work. The real conquerors, the real creators, and eternal proprietors of every great land are those souls that everywhere in it, each in his own degree, worked and ever felled a forest tree or drained a marsh, or contrived a wise scheme, or did such a true and valiant thing to uplift his fellows in society. All work is noble. A life of ease is not for man, nor for any god. I think that's kind of a very poignant statement to start this off with us, um, and to kick us off. We're told very clearly the importance of labor and its relationship to the divine. This idea that labor is the truest emblem of God. It is noble labor which is yet to be the king of this earth and sit on his highest throne. Men without duties to do so are like trees planted on precipice, from the roots of which all the earth has crumbled. The chief of men is he who stands in the van of men, fronting the peril which frightens back all others, and if not vanquished would devour them. Hercules was worshipped for 12 labors. The Tsar of Russia became a toiling shipwright, speaking of Tsar Peter there. And he worked in the docks. Cromwell worked, and Napoleon as well, and effected somewhat of change. Pike is reiterating here this fact that labor ennobles us, it lifts us up, and that we should realize from the lowest to the highest, it is a noble purpose. And we're shown this phrase, work is worship, labore est ore, because there is that nobleness and sacredness in work. Man perfects himself by working. Jungles are cleared away. Fields rise instead of and are replaced by stately cities, and man himself ceases, removing the unwholesome jungle and the desert thereby. Even in the meanest sort of labor, the whole soul of man is composed into a kind of real harmony the moment he begins to work. Labor is life, and from the innermost of the worker rises his God-given force, the sacred celestial life essence. There was the deepest truth in the saying of the old monks, labore est ore, or labor is to worship, or to pray, to work is to pray. Work and therein have well-being is the oldest of the Gospels, unpreached, inarticulate, but ineradicatable and enduring forever. To make disorder wheresoever found an internal enemy, to attack and subdue him, to make order of him, the subject, not the chaos, but of intelligence and divinity of ourselves, to attack ignorance and stupidity and brute-mindedness wherever we find it, to smite it wisely and unweariedly, to rest not while we live and it lives in the name of God. This is our duty as masons, commanded to us by the highest God. Let the weary cease to think that labor is a curse and doom pronounced by a deity, for we know better. Without it, in pain and sorrow, where would we be with the human virtues? Let him who toils complain not, nor feel humiliated. Let him look up and see the fellowship of the workmen there, in God's eternity, and they alone surviving there. Even in the weak human memory, they long survive, as saints, as heroes, as gods. They alone survive, and the people, the unmeasured solitudes of time. This idea of labor and duty kind of walk hand in hand, and Pike harps on things we've already discussed to a degree, but he reiterates this point that duty is with us ever. It forbids us to be idle, to work with our hand or our brain according to our requirements and our capacities, to do which lies before us is more honorable than rank or title. Masonry reminds us that it stands up for the nobility of labor. It is heaven's great ordinance for human improvement. It has been broken down for ages, and Masonry desires to build it up again. And I think that's kind of a beautiful thing. Masonry teaches us that every idler, every guy who idles about, every individual who does so, ought to hasten to find some field of labor, manual or mental, as a chosen and coveted theater for their improvement. But he is not impelled to do so under the teachings of an imperfect civilization. On the contrary, he may sit down, fold his hands, and bless and glorify himself in his idleness. It is time that this approbation of toil were done away with. To be ashamed of toil, of the dingy workshop, the dusty labor field, of the hard hand stained with service, of the spoiled and weather-stained garments which Mother Nature has stamped. These are to be set aside. Toil of the brain, the heart, the hand is the only true manhood and the genuine nobility. Labor is more beneficent ministration than man's ignorance comprehends or his complaining will admit. Pike blends this idea of labor being worship, duty being with us forever, and that we have to practice and carry out our duties by showing us very clearly that we shouldn't be ashamed to work. And he talks of dingy workshops and dusty fields and weather-stained garments and things like that. But we shouldn't be ashamed of that. We should be proud to labor. We should be proud to work. We should be ashamed, in his instruction, to just sit on our hands, to be idle, to live off of the work of others. And he informs us that the world, as such, then, is our great and appointed school of industry. If labor is man's great function, his distinction is privilege, and it separates us from being an animal who only eats and drinks and sleeps, we should become a worker, and with our hands of ingenuity, pour our thoughts into the molds of nature, fashion them into the forms of grace and the fabrics of convenience, convert them to the purposes of improvement and happiness. That is the greatest step in our privilege. The earth and the atmosphere are our laboratory. With the spade, the plow, with shafts and furnaces, forges, with fire and steam, midst and noise, and the world of swift, bright machinery, man has made ever working, ever experimenting. And it is better for us as a mason to live while we live, to labor while we live, carry out our duties, and enjoy life as it passes, to live richer and die poorer. Pike begins to talk about the laboring man, and he focuses on a sympathy with them and a need to labor with them, and the unashamed attitude we should have, if you will, about being a laborer. And then he begins to talk about enjoying life and that we can accumulate wealth, that we can be successful. And he emphasizes this in reminding us of our duty, again, not just to labor, but the fact that there are many reasons why a mason may lawfully and earnestly desire to have a fortune if he can fill a palace with works of art, the productions of genius, if he can be the friend and helper of humble worth, helping those who have failing health, adverse fortune in their bitter hours, helping them to the grave, if he can stand between the oppressor and his prey, bid the fetter and dungeon and to give up their victims. All of these things we can do with wealth if we open our mind to that service and not just to keeping it in our pocket. Yet, masonry does not owe us anything in that labor, and it will do us honor in its own ways, because masonry honors the worker, the toiler, who produces and not alone consumes, who puts forth his hand to add to the treasury of human comfort, not take away from it. It honors him who goes forth amid the struggling elements to fight his battle, and who shirks not with cowardly effeminacy behind the pillows of ease. It honors the strong muscle and the manly nerve and the resolute and brave heart, the sweating brow, the toiling brain. It honors the great and beautiful offices of humanity, manhood's toil and women's task, paternal industry and maternal watching and weariness, wisdom and teaching, patience, learning. All of these things it honors. Yet in the same spread, Pike takes a moment to address, of course, he talked about wealth, so he begins to talk about those who are perhaps not as wealthy, the poor. And he tells us that almost all the noblest things that have ever been achieved in the world have been achieved by poorer men, poor scholars, poor professional men, poor artisans, poor philosophers, and the like. There's a certain staidness and sobriety, a certain moderation and restraint, a certain pressure of circumstance which is good for man. His body is, of course, not made for luxury. It sickens, stinks, and dies under him. His mind is not made for indulgence. It grows weak, dwarfish under various conditions. And he who pampers his body with luxury and his mind with indulgence bequeath the consequence of his mind to his and body of his descendants without the wealth of their own cause. The history of wealth, of course, has always been the history of corruption and downfall. The people never existed that could stand the trial. Boundless profusion is too likely to spread for the people within the theater of manly energy. You do not look for the bones and sinew and strength of a country, its loftiest talents, its virtues, its martyrs to patriotism or religion, its men to meet the days of peril and disaster among the children of ease and indulgence and luxury. So here Pike is reiterating this fact that wealth always corrupts society, it always corrupts a nation, and that we shouldn't look within certain factions of society for some great hero, because at some point, when there is all that overflow of wealth, all that overflow of indulgence, those men won't be able to stand up in the days of peril and disaster. These children of ease, indulgence, luxury, he calls them. They won't be able to stand up to it. And yet we realize that all men desire distinction. They feel a need of some ennobling object in life. And those persons, of course, are most going to be happy and satisfied in their pursuits, per se, but they will have perhaps even loftier views in their end. Artists, mechanics, inventors all seek to find principles or develop beauty in their work and seem most to enjoy it. With the pursuits of the multitude connected, why work if the world is soon to not know that it ever existed? And when one can perpetuate his name, neither on canvas or marble, nor books or lofty eloquence, why do we still continue to labor? Well, the answer is perhaps simply that every man has work to do in himself, greater and sublimer than the work of genius, and works upon nobler material than wood or marble, upon his own soul. And it's to that end that we must be aware. Because masonry ennobles common life. It seeks to build us up. It works to go down into the obscure, unsearched records of daily conduct and feeling, to portray not only virtue of an extraordinary life, but the more extraordinary virtue of ordinary life. What is done and born in the shades of privacy is in the hard and the beaten path of daily care and toil, full of uncelebrated sacrifices, in the suffering, and sometimes the insulted suffering, that wears the world on a cherished brow, in the long strife of the spirit, resisting pain, the neglect carried on in the innermost depths of our heart. What is done and born and wrought and won there is higher glory, and shall inherit the brighter crown. On the volume of Masonic life, one bright word is written, which sits on every side in ineffable splendor, and that word is duty. To aid in securing to all labor permanent employment and its just reward, to help hasten the coming of a time when no one shall suffer from hunger or destitution, because through willingness and being able to work, he can find no employment, or because he is overtaken by sickness in the midst of his labor. Those are parts of your duty as a knight of the Royal Axe. My brothers, take some time in this section, consider Pike's commentary about wealth, I guess would be the easiest way to sum that up. But he talks about a mason to live while he lives and enjoy life as it passes, than to live rich and die poor. Consider that. Also consider Pike's commentary on the ennobling of people through this section. Some good commentary here as we consider labor and its implications. Really a unique and enjoyable section as we consider the importance of labor and we kind of solidify our stance on some virtues and concepts that are going to come into play as we dig into the deep and more profound lessons of the mystery degrees ahead. My brothers, I thank you for joining us, being a part of today's program. And we look forward to seeing you next time as we dive further into Master Craftsman philosophy. For the Valley of St. Louis Master Craftsman Study Group programs, have a great evening, good morning, good night, whatever it may be. And we will see you next time We look forward to another great discussion.